Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 62nd edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 381st episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, February 1st, 2018. I'm your host, jerodmorris, and let's begin this week how we begin every episode of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And for this week's banner moment, I'm going to take you back to the Purdue game on Sunday, midway through the second half, when Indiana took a 53-48 lead on Al Durham's and one. And, you know, when you think about that game and the expectations coming in to be there midway through the second half, leading by 5 against a team of Purdue's caliber this season, and given the struggles that Indiana has had, I think all of us would have taken that. And obviously the rest of that game, even the next, minute didn't go quite how Indiana would have wanted, as Purdue quickly scored 5 points, tied it up, and they, of course, would go on to win that game by executing late. But I thought Indiana showed something, and certain players certainly showed something by being ready to compete in that game and playing well. And this program clearly needs to get to a point where we're not happy just competing against Purdue. That obviously is a sign of really how down the program is right now. So in a macro sense, there's nothing to be proud of, nothing to be happy about or celebrate. But in a micro sense, I thought the team showed some grit and showed some fight and showed some of the growth in key areas that are important. And I thought a guy like Al Durham in particular, well, he didn't do a ton in that game. I thought that play in particular, his drive and ability to score through contact, was indicative of a positive that he has shown this year. And as we progress forward now through this season, with postseason play seeming so unlikely for this team, the development of young players and them really showing what they can do and developing their skills is going to be so important. And if you saw the article that I posted on our blog about 5 plays that have really been working for Indiana, people might be surprised that Al Durham actually, as a ball handler in pick and rolls, and Al Durham near the basket, have been 2 of Indiana's most efficient offensive plays. Indiana scoring 1.25 points per possession when Al Durham leads, is the ball handler in the pick and roll, 1.438 points possession when he has the ball around the basket, both in the 90th percentiles. And so while Al continues to struggle as a shooter, obviously his ability to drive and be effective around the basket is a good sign for his ability moving forward. And so I thought that play on a week that didn't give Indiana fans much to celebrate, that was one moment that at least stuck out as something good on the court that we can point to as things to build on moving forward. All right, let me introduce now my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, we have one of the world's most respected bracketologists, and you can find his brackets this year over on InsideTheHall.com. And he is also the longtime president of the Robert Johnson Fan Club. He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what is your Bottoms line on the past week in Indiana basketball?
I think with all these games in quick succession here, I think it's been a good synopsis of the flaws of this team and the ways that they've improved, which sounds like kind of a weird thing to say as you really look at them all together. But, in the end, I think if you're a glass half full person, as Jared, we know you are, you can look at this easily and look at how much the defense has improved and look at the things this team has gotten better with, even from just a year ago. Turnovers, while not great in the second half of the Purdue game, still only 10. And more games than not, those things have been positive, and the defense has improved and all those kinds of things. And then on the flip side, you look at the flaws that we bring up over and over. The team just can't shoot the ball very well, or hasn't shot the ball well in games, I guess maybe is a better way to say it, whether that be from 3-point range or from the free throw line. And, some of those kinds of issues just continue to crop up, and the flaws just from a roster standpoint and depth and size and a true point guard and all those kinds of things are all, on display. And I think that all kind of nets out to a weird place where you can kind of take the season however you want to at this point. And I do think the one thing that I kind of look for going down the stretch is, once you get past the hurdle of this Michigan State game on Saturday, there are some winnable games there. And I think maybe those are better tests for just how much things have improved than certainly the last couple games have been against, the two top teams in the league, and then Michigan State again coming up. So I think I kind of set my sights on, those final, I guess it's 6 games after the Michigan State game, and really, look forward to those to try to maybe make a more realistic assessment on how things have really progressed. And so I think we're all trying to, in large part, stay positive and focus on the improvements that have been made, while trying not to get bogged down too much in the struggles that this team obviously has, and the things that are going to continue for these last 7 games and however many games they play in the Big Ten tournament and games after that. Those probably aren't going to go away at this point. And so, it's all just a matter of your perspective and what you want to focus in on.
And to my right, we have a man who, after seeing Indiana honor Victor Oladipo, is now holding out hope that when we are all in attendance for the February 23rd game against Ohio State, that Indiana will honor him pregame with a framed copy of his IDS story on the Marco Killingsworth Duke game and let him say a few inspirational words to the fans. He's a columnist for The Big Lead, and he is a man who hemmed and hawed but finally decided to use all $5 million of his assembly call earnings to purchase a 30-second Super Bowl ad imploring Archie Miller to finally consider him for the position of IU basketball shot doctor. His slogan, which he wrote himself but has not yet tested with any focus groups, is, with a coach this hot, you'll make all your shots. He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, what is your rant from the past week in Indiana basketball?
How long do you spend writing these? I got to know. It's got to be like half the prep time for the show is spent writing those. Yes, I am upset that Indiana never honored me at half court with anything. I think that you lose games to good teams, and it doesn't feel good. You don't come away saying, "Oh, hey, that was great." But I think that we did see some improvement in the Purdue game, and you saw that what this team could be when it adds talent at key spots. And look, the shooting is an issue, and it's not going to, as Andy said, it's not going to go away. They need a 3-point shooter. They need a couple 3-point shooters. They need guys to make their free throws. I mean, those simple things need to be fixed. And you hope that next year it will be. And I think it's something that it's a real question for Archie and his coaching staff. What are they going to do to improve that? And I'd love to see a reporter ask that question at post-game press conference. Like, what is your plan for next year to make sure these issues aren't here? Is it a coaching thing? Is it guys on their own, going and just working and getting in the gym? Or is it something where the coaching staff needs to set up certain drills and work with each individual player on his shot, all that stuff? Because it's a glaring issue. I mean, it really is. And it's holding this team back from continuing to develop. I mean, if you're shooting, below 60% from the free throw line in a game, you're going to lose that game almost every time, because those are free points you're giving up. And there's no one that's reliable right now in that situation. And then as far as 3-point shooting, I mean, look, for a team that plays in the paint as much as this one does, you've got to have guys you can kick it out to, because the defense is just going to suck right down into that post area and dare you to shoot threes until you can make them. And right now, that's a big issue for Indiana. It was nice to see Devontae Green hit a few the other night against Ohio State, but one guy hitting shots is not going to change things for Indiana. So I think this is something that Archie really needs to get pressed on. And if he doesn't have anything in his back pocket to fix these woes, he needs to maybe consider changing things. And maybe, and I don't think he's a guy who's super stuck in his ways. So I think he'd be willing to do that, especially a guy who's a numbers guy. You'd want him to sort of look at the situation and, maybe go get some advice from somebody to change that, to fix that, because it's certainly necessary, and this team needs that moving forward.
Yep. All right. Well, here's what we're going to discuss this week. Less rehashing of the Ohio State game and previewing Michigan State, because we obviously did that on the Ohio State postgame show, and we previewed Michigan State a couple of weeks ago. We're going to do a little bit more kind of spitballing fun topics that you all sent us, and you sent us some good ones. The first one is actually a little bit frustrating. It's this debate about Chris Holtmann and Archie Miller, and why Holtmann is seeming to have an easier transition. And we've addressed it before, Ryan. I know you've addressed it a lot, but we keep getting this question. So Andy's got some points to make on that here coming up. We're also going to debate whether this roster is just a bad roster or an underperforming roster. What is the better explanation for why this team is struggling, and many other topics, including some thoughts on Zach McRoberts getting a scholarship, and why Tom Crean can catch so much flack for his coaching, but be so universally lauded as an analyst. All of that and more coming up here on the Assembly Call, on Assembly Call Radio. And now for this quick reminder, the next time that you're looking for tickets to a sporting event or a concert, remember our friends at SeatGeek. You can download their app, which is incredibly convenient and easy to use, or if you just want an easy-to-remember URL that will take you directly to the IU basketball ticket listings on SeatGeek's website, Here it is, iutickets.shop. For example, if you want tickets to any of Indiana's remaining Big Ten games or the Big Ten tournament, and not just Indiana home games, but road games as well, they have them all there at that URL, iutickets.shop. So use it and check out all of the latest deals at SeatGeek. And if it's your first time using SeatGeek, then don't forget the promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY. Use it when you make your first purchase, and you will get $20 back after that purchase. Again, the promo code is ASSEMBLY. All right, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jerod Morris. I'm here with Ryan Phillips and Andy Bottoms. And Andy, let's talk about this. We got a couple emails on this. Ohio State struggled last year. They fired their coach in the preseason. They're picked to finish 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th in the Big Ten. No one really expected much out of them. And here they are with one loss in Big Ten play, sitting in second place. Obviously, they just destroyed us in their home building. And Indiana obviously hasn't ascended as quickly under Archie Miller. So people look at this and they say, wow, Ohio State made this great hire with Chris Holtmann. He's a home run. Archie Miller looks like there's some growth, but I don't really know. The first thing to mention here is it is way, way too early to make any big time judgments about either coach. There's just not a big enough sample. We haven't seen them go through, their own recruiting classes, all of that stuff. Just look what the struggles Greg Gard is having now as he, the program is having more of his fingerprint on it. So it's too early to judge, but people are judging. So perhaps you can give us some insight on why there are some real fundamental differences between the situation Holtmann inherited and the situation Archie inherited that make the comparison, while understandable, a little bit unfair.
Yeah, just to circle back for a second after you said we weren't going to rehash some of these games and had some other good topics to hit. It's funny because my wife asked tonight, we were eating dinner. She's like, with all these games, aren't you guys getting kind of tired of, like, how do you keep saying, like, how do you find new things to say? I was like, I don't know. So this at least gives us a good chance to do that. So, I brought up a few things we had a listener, Heather, who wrote in and kind of asked this question. So I at least had a chance to sit down and think about it a little bit. So here's kind of the way that I went, and you guys feel free to jump in if you disagree with anything. So one, I kind of titled addition by subtraction. So Ohio State didn't return a lot of scholarship guys. That was, kind of the big storyline with them in the offseason was how few scholarship guys they actually had coming back. But, I think some of the guys they lost, I think it truly was addition by subtraction. I mean, the next person who says something good about Jaquan Lyle as a person, as an influence, as a leader will be the first. And so I think certainly losing him was a big deal. I think he never really bought into what Thad Matta wanted to do. And I think to a lesser extent, guys like Trevor Thompson, who put his name in the NBA draft early, proceeded to not get drafted. And then, Mark Loving, who kind of had just an odd career there. I thought, those kinds of things to me, kind of point a little bit in that regard. System continuity. I think we touched on this on a radio show at some point in the past, but I think while Holtmann and Matta don't play the exact same way, I think there's a lot more similarity there than there is when you go from what Crean wanted to do versus what Archie wants to do. It's not a commentary on which one's right or wrong. It's more just a commentary on, we talk about, breaking bad habits, all those kinds of things that IU struggles with. It's been a little bit less of an issue at Ohio State, I would say. And I think for IU, in a lot of ways, it's been kind of a night and day, shift in focus on the things that are really, kind of core beliefs, values, strategies, whatever you want to say. The other roster wise, they both have some experienced guys. I think, IU, obviously everybody comes in and says, hey, you got 5 seniors. You've got, Juwan Morgan, who's played a decent amount, but the fact is these guys haven't played together nearly as much as you would normally expect for, you think back to, some of the older IU teams, and you had seniors. I mean, they had played together a ton. Robert Johnson has obviously played a lot in his 4 years. Newkirk transferred in, so practiced with him for a year. This is really just his second year playing and second coach in those years. Hartman's been in and out with injuries throughout his career, and obviously this year no different. Freddie McSwing comes in from junior college, is kind of like a raw guy. Didn't play a ton last year. Has been asked to play more and has played better, of late. So yeah, and then Priller really hasn't played hardly at all. So, even though you've got those, quote unquote experienced guys, to me, it's not quite the same. Ohio State, Tate and Bates Diop are both top 70 guys of the guys who are actually active for IU right now. So take Deron Davis out of the mix. I think Robert Johnson might be the only top 100 guy.
Morgan was right on the cusp.
Yeah, I think he was right there. In a piece Zach Osterman wrote today, he had kind of the recruiting rankings laid out. So, but he's certainly the only guy that would be inside of that top 70. So we'll say it that way. Jerron Davis would be as well. He's obviously not playing. Cam Williams has played a lot over the course of his career, and I think you throw in Andrew Dockage. They've talked about him from a leadership perspective. Everybody's probably rolling their eyes as I say that, I'm sure. But I think they've got a pretty good core from a leadership standpoint. Bates Diop missed a lot of time and had been injured, but while a quiet guy, kind of does the right thing. So I think, those kinds of things to me are the differences. And the fourth thing I kind of put kind of as a joke, but it's kind of true. I mean, they're actually making shots from 3-point range and the free throw line, which obviously helps, and something we've lamented a lot about IU. So those to me are the things. It is not to take anything away from what Holtmann has done. He's been fantastic and should absolutely be in the coach of the year discussion, not only in the league, but in the country. Yeah. But I don't think the difference in their performance is necessarily an indictment of Archie Miller at the same time.
Here's every single situation is different. You cannot compare one coach's situation to another. It's completely different. And I think that in Archie's defense, he is playing with players who are, as you mentioned, are fits to a system that is completely opposite of his. And Mata and Holtmann both come from that sort of Butler way system where, I mean, they're not identical, but the things that are important are pretty much the same. And so he had players who fit what he wanted to do. I don't think you can really indict Archie Miller for not having a quick turnaround, especially given the roster limitations that he has. I think a more fair comparison would be Brad Underwood at Illinois to what Archie's doing, because he's completely changing the way they play with players who don't necessarily fit.
Well, that's a good segue. Coming up on the Assembly Call, we discuss and potentially debate whether Indiana's struggles this season are more attributable to a bad roster or an underperforming roster. That's next. Stick with us. Okay.
Can the roster be bad and underperforming?
Well, that's how I'm going to lead into it. Is obviously it's both, but you got to pick one. Like, which one is more? Because I think it's pretty obvious that it's both, but that doesn't make for interesting radio. So you got to pick one. By the way, hello to everybody on YouTube. It's great to see you all here. And for those of you who are doing the live chat, once again, it wasn't up right away. Something's up with the default settings when I create these that changed. So I'll look at it and see why that chat isn't working unless I go in and manually add it after we start, because that's weird. Let me see how long that took us. That was 17:08. So yeah. So we'll talk about that this segment and just see how much fun we have, and then we'll pick up the other topics.
How long was that?
Segment 3. That was 17 minutes and 8 seconds. Like half of that was my intro for you.
I know, seriously.
Hey, you know what though? I mean, people enjoy the intro. And they're fun to do. Andy, how are you feeling about the Super Bowl?
I mean, I feel a lot like IU, where I go into the game with relatively low expectations and then just hope to be pleasantly surprised. Quite honestly,
it's probably a good way to do it.
No, I don't know. I mean, obviously, playing the Patriots, most everybody is not going to be favored in that scenario.
This is the least buzz for a Super Bowl I've ever encountered.
Yeah,
like there's just no.
I wonder if there's just less buzz for football. I mean,
But it's been this way for the last couple of years. It's been like diminishing every year, the amount of buzz. I don't know if you're right. It might be just a football thing. I haven't
opened up an article about the Super Bowl.
I think it's Patriots fatigue. I honestly do. I think people just expect them to win and they're just bored.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they do. I think the being in Minnesota thing is weird. Now, if the Vikings were there and it was in Minnesota, that would probably be different. I mean, Nick Foles doesn't really elicit strong emotions in anyone.
If it were Wentz, at least there'd be the young buck.
If it was Wentz, it would probably be a little bit different too.
Yeah. All right. That's enough football talk, I think. Let's give the people what they came here for. Indiana basketball talk. Let's do it. You guys ready?
Yep.
Okay. Here we go. Ryan, I'll come to you first with this one, since Andy took the bulk of that last one. All right, here we go. Let's do this. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Brian Phillips. Don't forget that if you ever have to miss all or part of an episode of Assembly Call Radio, there are two great ways that you can catch up. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for Assembly Call, or you can join our live Thursday night broadcasts or watch the video replays by subscribing to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Assembly Call. All right, so we got this question from Jared, who's in our Slack community. Not me, another Jared. He said, based on what you've seen this season, do you see a roster that is underperforming or just a bad roster? I'm wondering if this is a bad roster for a good coach or a coach that is struggling to get the most out of this roster. And we're going to take that in a general sense, but he also kind of asked specifically what the perspective of future recruits might be, and if they might think about that and if that might impact them, maybe kind of explaining away, perhaps some of the struggles Archie has had in that way. So keep that in mind as well. And Ryan, I want to kick this to you first, but I think it's important to lay out this parameter. I think we can all agree that it's not a great roster. And if you want some reasons for why the roster is where it is, Zach Osterman wrote a great piece for the Indianapolis Star. It was perfectly timed given our topic tonight, where he lays out Indiana's recruiting classes since 2013. And, the lack of a point guard and the struggles with shooting and why there's has been such little post depth. And it obviously shows the successes too, but some of the failures in roster construction that have happened. And to be fair to Tom Crean, some of the unexpected departures to the NBA that have happened. But I think also there have been guys, this season that have underperformed expectations. I mean, a guy like Curtis Jones was a high recruit that was expected to play well, and he played poorly and ended up transferring. So, I mean, there's a combination of both. But to make this interesting, you got to pick one that you think explains it more. So, Ryan, for you, when you think about the struggles of this year's team, is it more because it's a bad roster, or is it more because it's an underperforming roster?
What I would say about it, and I would categorize it as a bad roster because I don't think the pieces fit well together. So I would say a bad roster because I'm not saying it's bad players necessarily. It's just guys who don't fit together, I don't think. I mean, if Zach McRoberts could shoot, you might have a better team. If Colin Hartman could ever stay healthy, you might have a better team. If Josh Newkirk could drive and finish at the rim with consistency, you might have a better team. If Devontae Green could get through a whole game without making boneheaded plays, you might have a better team. I mean, so I think that the pieces are there for another team, to could add to other teams, but they don't fit well together. And it feels like they're, it's just guys who are just slammed together that have no continuity. And that's part of that is, a few misses on the recruiting trail. Part of that is guys not developing the way they should have. Part of it is, an old system where, I mean, let's face it, if this team were running Tom Crean's system, they might be worse than they are with Archie Miller because they can't shoot. And his system was completely based on outside shooting and spreading the floor. And so I would say that I think it's just a lot of weird pieces where guys have not gotten better. I mean, look, a guy like Robert Johnson, and you want to talk about underperforming, a guy like Robert Johnson has been playing pretty well of late. I mean, better of late, but he's still not shooting at the rate he should be, and for a team that desperately needs shooting, he needs to be better. And, and other guys, again, just not developing and not rising to the level that they should. And so I think it's a combination of the two, as you said, but I think if I had to say it, it's a bad roster because I don't think the pieces fit well together. And I think that there's going to be a lot of shuffling in the offseason, especially with a bunch of new recruits coming in, fitting in some roles that might be more traditional for what Archie's looking for. And I don't know if guys are going to leave or what. I mean, we don't speculate about that on here, but you're going to have a lot of seniors going, and then you're going to have, younger guys who are going to more fit what Archie wants to do. So we don't know what's going to happen, but at the same time, I mean, you look at this roster and it just does not look like these guys all play the same way and with the same goals at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with you on the bad roster part. You look at the glaring lack of a true point guard, as you mentioned, the lack of shooters, lack of post depth, and obviously that was hurt by Davis getting hurt. But the other thing is, parts of the roster are underperforming, but there are actually parts of the roster that are performing above expectations that are keeping Indiana afloat. I don't think anybody expected, Juwan Morgan to be quite this good and quite this capable of carrying the team on his shoulders. Did you really expect him to be this good though?
No,
Like
I mean not to the level he's been playing at the
Yeah,
last few weeks.
that's
No,
what I mean.
I'm kidding. But I did expect him to have a big year if he stayed healthy. And I think we all
Yes.
expected this kind of development from him last year if he had stayed healthy, but
Yes.
he didn't, So I think that's why I said that at the beginning of the year too, is that I thought that he would have exploded last year, but he just didn't stay healthy. And so this is, sort of his time to shine, I guess.
Yeah, and and you've got guys like Zach McRoberts that are playing above expectations. Freddie McSwain, despite struggles, I think has played above expectations given the contributions that he's made. So I think there are players who are playing above expectations. So that's why, to me, it's more bad roster than underperforming roster. Andy, where do you side on this? Is there even going to be a reason for debate, or do you kind of agree with us?
No, I would say I agree with you guys. It's I think the difficulty is, and even some of the expectations when you start to look at that, I think the expectations have had to change a lot for some of these guys. I mean, the expectations of this year of what you probably thought you needed to get from Justin Smith changed a ton with Colin Hartman and Jeron Davis being injured as much as they have. And, the expectations for a guy like Al Durham, I think, changed a lot at the beginning of the season, partly because he played well and partly because it became clear that there really wasn't a clear-cut answer at the point guard position. And I think that's where, when you really look at the roster construction, I mean, those are the things that really stick out. I mean, since Yogi has been gone, obviously you're not expecting somebody to come in and do that. But, for 2 straight years, point guard, a guy that you can really rely on, as it became, clear in the Illinois game, that hasn't really gotten any better. And I think some of those kinds of things, I think the shooting, while some of that is a little bit hard to predict, and certainly guys this year have not shot as well as they have over the course of their careers, it just seems, as Ryan said, like a really odd roster if you try to transfer them into a Crean system. I just struggle to understand how they'd be successful in that as well. So in that regard, it even seemed like a weird lineup, even if a coaching change wasn't made, because the reality is that, Tom Crean coming back or not coming back didn't really impact Bryant and Anunoby's decisions to go to the pros. I wouldn't say. I think both of those had been, discussed for a while. So to me, that wasn't a factor there. So this is, truly the exact roster that would have been here had Crean been there. And you just struggled to figure out, on a team that was predicated on offense and shooting the ball well, how this team would have been able to flourish in that kind of system. So to me, that points to the roster, and I would have answered the question the same way, no matter who was the coach, quite frankly. Then you layer on the fact that they don't necessarily fit well into what Archie wants to do. I think it just exaggerates the issue.
Yeah. All right. So we're all in agreement. So we don't need to have a debate. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jerodmorris.
How often does that happen, by the way?
Here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. Jim from our
Skip Bayless and just try to take the other point there, but I just my heart just wasn't in it. I couldn't.
I know. So Jim from our Slack channel, he's wondering how hopeful we are about the shooting improving next year with or without Romeo. Obviously, Romeo, who scored 63 points on the night that we recorded this, he would help Indiana shooting tremendously. We know that. So remove him from the equation. You've got guys obviously like Devontae Green coming back, Al Durham coming back, who have been inconsistent at best from 3-point range. Devontae had a nice percentage as a freshman, but we've seen him be quite inconsistent this year. You look at some of the new guys coming in. Demezy Anderson is a really, really good shooter. Effortless is the way that his coach described him. Robert Finney can shoot, but I don't think he's on a Yogi level, for example. And Jerome Hunter, another guy that I think sometimes people forget when it comes to shooting, he's a terrific outside shooter for a guy with, kind of his size and versatility. Now, if that'll be able to translate to the college game as a freshman, we'll have to see. Sometimes for guys, it takes them a year or two, to kind of translate and be comfortable, shooting in a new offense against, players more their size and skill level. But Ryan, you kind of talked about this a little bit in your opening statement about what's the plan here to improve this shooting. What are you thinking just in terms of what you know about the incoming recruits and what you expect from the guys coming back for this team to become a better shooting team next year? Because it has been such a glaring weakness this season. Yeah,
and I think that reporters who were in there with Archie, after every game or practice or whatever, need to ask him about it and need to ask him what he plans to do and what
besides hire you.
What'd you say?
I said besides hire you.
Right, of course. No. But I mean he needs to come up with something. And if it's not, something he's got in his bag of tricks, he needs to go out and hire somebody who can do it. I mean, we saw Tim Buckley for years be a shot doctor. Is there another guy out there who can do that for you and make these guys better shooters? Are there drills that maybe they used to do under Tom Crean that he could bring to the table? It needs to be a focus. And I realize that, his focus is defense and running offense that gets you points in the paint, but you got to be able to shoot at the next level, to get your team to the next level out of this. And I think that it needs to be the guys who are coming back need to get better. And like the incoming guys are good. There are a couple of really nice shooters in there, but they still need to improve, from here to the next level. And I just think that it's something that needs to be a focus of the offseason for these guys. And I do have, knowing what I know about Archie and what we all know about Archie, I think that he's a guy who is a problem solver, and he's going to work on something to try and solve that problem.
Yeah, well, and let me add this too. Also maybe this was kind of a one-year aberration, with some guys not quite used to the new system, getting shots they're not used to, because while Archie's free throw shooting percentages at Dayton weren't great,
and that needs
teams. He did have teams that shot well from 3-point range. I mean, his last team was in the top 40. He had, another team that was in the top 20. So he did field some teams, and none of them were below just at least average in terms of 3-point shooting. So that hasn't been as historically a problem for Archie Miller coach teams as the free throws. And again, I haven't done Ken Pomeroy style analysis on how much the coach influences that, but just from the sample size of Archie at Dayton, I just wanted to give that context. Andy, I know you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is a guy who I think could really be key to that is Zach McRoberts. Some of I think it was on Archie's radio show tonight, talked about he's going to graduate this year, but intends to, come back and play next year. So, for a guy who's shown some ability to shoot the ball recently, just get him in the gym and have him keep working at it. I mean, I kind of liken it to, he's known for his defense. I look back at Dane Fife's stats in his senior year. He shot 47% from three. Obviously, was really good defensively. So, can Zach somehow transform himself into, 47% might be a high bar. But when you think about how Fife shot the ball in his first few years at IU, I mean, who would have really expected that either? So I think
that's not a terrible comparison for Zach McRoberts. I hadn't thought about that, but it's not bad.
That's why I get paid the big bucks.
Someday he'll get passed over for being the Indiana coach too.
Oh my goodness, that was a shot across the bow.
And upset a very small portion of the fan base to no end. And they'll end up in my email inbox yelling at me about why I'm not defending Dane Fife as the head coach. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
Wait, was my mic on?
I did not expect the show to take that turn right
I
there.
didn't know my mic was on. I'm sorry. I was talking to myself.
Wow. That was something. So anyway, but I think that would be interesting. I mean, if he can become that, he's already kind of the defense guy. If he can become the, kind of like 3-and-D guy, I mean, I think that could be interesting. And he's a guy that I don't think people look at for offense, but if he could come out and hit, routinely knock down 2 threes, 3 threes a game, I think that could be really big, because it's a guy who's probably going to continue to earn minutes, at least in the short term, as the freshmen get up to speed. So I think he and Demezi probably have the maybe the best chances to influence that number.
Yeah. All right. And Andy, let's hit this question from the wonderfully named Hank Hill on Acid on Twitter. Wonders, what are realistic expectations
Seek help.
for IU fans under the assumption that they don't land Romeo? And you kind of went through and did, and he mentions things seem to be wide open in the Big Ten next season. You're not necessarily so sure that everything is quite that wide open in the Big Ten. What does the Big Ten kind of look like, and how do you think Indiana might stack up? Way, way, way too early, but just as you look at it right now.
Yeah, I kind of looked at the top handful of teams and those that had maybe projected recruiting classes in the top half based on like the 24/7 sports ranking. So I think the obvious one that should take a step back is Purdue. Given the seniors that they lose, they don't really have a strong recruiting class coming in. So I think without question they'll take a step back. Carson Edwards, I would presume, will still be there and is a really good player, but they're going to be really counting on some other guys to step into much more prominent roles than they have. Michigan State, it seems reasonable to expect they'd lose Miles Bridges and Jaren Jackson. They've got, looks like 3 4-stars and 2 3-stars coming in. Obviously, there's a whole lot of variables in that situation right now, but I don't think from a talent perspective, I don't know that Ward, Winston, Langford all leave, and I think they have fewer seniors than people probably would expect them to. Ohio State loses Tate, Cam Williams, Bates Diop, I think took a medical red shirt, so I think he could come back depending on what he wants to do. They've got, kind of same thing, 2 4-stars, 2 3-stars. They should, again, I think Holtmann's going to build something there. There's not going to be a huge drop off. Michigan, it's really hard to say. They lose Abdul Rahman, they lose Duncan Robinson. Wagner kind of looked at the NBA last year. Charles Matthews played well. Does he look at that? But they've got a pretty good recruiting class coming in. Maryland is an interesting one to me. They lose Sikorsky and Nickens. And now who knows what those sophomores do coming back with Jackson coming off injury, but they add a 5-star and 2 4-stars. So I think they could be pretty interesting. IU, to me, it hinges very much on Juwan Morgan, and obviously Romeo. I mean, those are the two, big swing pieces. If neither of them ends up here, I think you start to see some good things built from a foundational standpoint with that freshman class next year, but you're going to be relying on them a whole lot in the absence of some grad transfers and things like that. So a little bit tough to say. I mean, I certainly think IU could improve itself, but I think, Langford, obviously the big one people talking about, but I think Juwan Morgan, I mean, you see what he means to the team when he's off the floor this year. If he would opt to go in the draft, we would all obviously wish him the best and root for him, but that would have a pretty distinct impact on the team and how it would fare next year.
Yeah. All right. Coming up on the assembly call, we talk about the potential of Zach McRoberts earning a scholarship. We had a question about Tom Crean and why he can maybe struggle as a coach, but be such a good announcer. We'll hit that and more in our next segment. Stick with us. All right. 16:09. So another long one. And now we've got 2 shorter ones.
Man, I never knew what kinds of emotions Dane.
Yeah. Wow.
Drum up in Ryan.
I didn't know that either. Is there a backstory there? Do we need to have like a Coach K segment?
Maybe
you and Dane Fife?
I like Dane Fife, but people were all over me. Like, why wasn't I supporting Fife for head coach? There was a really
because your endorsement really could have pushed that over.
Exactly. Like what? They were like, why do you keep talking about Billy Donovan? What about Dane Fife? He's a Hoosier.
Okay, but would anyone have really taken Fife over Donovan though?
No, but it's like they were like, well, you were stumping for Donovan. Why aren't you stumping for a fellow Hoosier? Like, because they all knew that I hated Alford, but there was that group that was like only a Hoosier, and I was like,
I liked Fife's candidacy after, the Donovans and the Tony Bennetts of the world. But like, I thought he was an interesting choice.
Like, look, he's a nice dude, and I like him, but where is he proven that he can coach? That's
the issue. It is a leap of massive faith.
Yeah,
probably not in Indiana. Probably
has he ever recruited gone into a 5-star's living room and won him over? I mean, it's like, yeah, he's done well at Michigan State, but he's also got Tom Izzo behind him.
Yeah, you can't take that. You can't take that leap for basketball. You can take that leap with Tom Allen in football because it's IU football. But you can't
exactly
with the basketball program.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, it's not a topic I thought we'd address, but that's why we love this show.
Hey, you mentioned Dane Fife.
Different directions.
You mentioned Dane Fife.
You get what you ask for.
Get what you ask for.
Okay, so yeah, so Jake's got a question, and then we'll talk about the Crean thing. So we can hit those two. I mean, that'll take us through this segment, and then we got a few things for the final segment.
Sounds good.
And if you have any questions in the chat, let us know. Anything you want to discuss in the last segment, let us know. Put them in there. Okay. Here we go. Okay, you guys ready? Let's do this. Here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. Go to assemblycall.com/join right now to learn how to subscribe to our email newsletter. If you want to get more out of being an IU basketball fan, then you need to be on our newsletter list because you will get our weekly 6-Banner Sunday news roundups as well as our post-game analysis emails that are sent the morning after every IU game. It is all free and it will make you a smarter IU basketball fan. Again, the URL is assemblycall.com/join. I am Jerodmorris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, my usual co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU post-game show. And this week, we're going through some of the topics that you sent us, some burning questions that you had that you wanted us to address. Jake in our Slack community, and by the way, if you're on Slack and you want to join our IU basketball Slack community, just shoot me an email, jared@assemblycall.com. But Jake says, naturally we'd all love to land Romeo. Obviously, it's funny. A lot of the questions this week were like, we all want to get Romeo, but it's like everybody's kind of trying to get their contingency plans in order, just to to not be too disappointed if it doesn't go our way. But he says, if that doesn't happen, thoughts on giving McBob one of the 2 free scholarships and finding a grad transfer point guard. Leaves 3 for 2019, where Archie seems to be doing well. Also gives better class balance. So here's what I would say about that. I certainly think that Indiana needs to look for a grad transfer guard. I mean, if you don't get Romeo, you have to. I don't think you can enter next year with only Robert Finney, Devontae Green, and Al Durham as your guards. You've got to have something more than that. But I think the question about McRoberts is interesting. He's now a guy who's played at least 30 minutes in 4 straight games. He is, without question, one of Indiana's 3 best players. And while most nights Juwan Morgan is the clear number 1, there are some nights McRoberts is number 2 on that list. And I don't think anybody would have expected that. So to me, I don't see how there's any way that Zach McRoberts isn't a scholarship player next year unless he doesn't want the scholarship. Unless he's just like, hey, my brother's got that NBA money. I don't need the scholarship. Use it some other way. But I think he absolutely should have the opportunity and should be a scholarship player because he's earned it. And if you don't, I just don't know. Not only would that not be fair, I just don't know what kind of message that sends that this guy that's getting all these minutes isn't going to be on scholarship. So we'll see what happens there. I have no idea what will happen, but it was certainly good to hear, Andy, as you mentioned, that McRoberts will be coming back. He will be graduating, but he will be coming back next year because he's become such an important player on the team. Your thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah, I think, certainly nobody's going to bat an eye if they offer him that scholarship. And to your point, I think the important thing there is he's earned it. I think and
it would only be for 1 year. That's the other thing.
Yeah, I think the what I liked about the question was really about the balance between classes. What we have this year is 5 seniors. And then, next year, Morgan is the only junior on scholarship. So you can't really, while you obviously need a big recruiting class, and I think in anybody's first year, they're going to have that. You can't put yourself in a position where you don't have a lot of things to offer year in and year out, and you have this huge roster bubble. And so I think anything that would help balance that out a little bit. I think the point about the 2019 guys is interesting as well. And the whole grad transfer thing, I think, becomes important as well, because to what you said, I think they need somebody. I think there would be, potential options out there that could help with that scenario and rebalance that a little bit. So I think the balance between the classes is probably the biggest reason for me to do that, and gives Archie, a lot more flexibility going forward, as opposed to, I've only got 1 or 2 to offer in a given year. I think if you get yourself to a point where you got roughly the same year in and year out, I think you end up in a better spot.
Ryan?
Yeah, I think that everybody's in favor of Zach getting that scholarship, but again, if you're Archie, you've got to consider roster construction, you've got to consider balance, and you've got to consider, obviously you want to get Romeo, and you also might want to bank a scholarship as far as the grad transfer goes. I think that makes sense, but a regular transfer, I would move against, because you're still building and you want to maybe bank that scholarship to the next year. You don't have to fill all the scholarship spots this year, and you also may have transfers. So we don't really know what's going to happen, but yeah, if you have an open scholarship, I think Zach McRoberts has certainly earned it. But as you said, it may be a situation where sometimes guys whose families do well and our walk-ons don't want that scholarship. So we'll see. I think just as not even from a money perspective, but from a respect perspective, he at least deserves the offer at some point.
Yes.
If he has
respect, no question.
If he has the, if that comes up.
And not just like if XYZ things work out and we happen to have it. Like, I think it needs to be a priority to get him a scholarship if he wants one. I just think he's earned it. I just think you would lose some credibility for what you're really trying to build if a guy that does everything you ask isn't rewarded in that way. So anyway, that's my push. I think we're all generally in agreement there. I think all IU fans are generally in agreement there. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. So here's another interesting one. This is from East Coast Hoosier on Slack, who said that there was a Reddit thread, apparently, that said, Indiana fans, please explain to me how Tom Crean seems to catch so much flack for not knowing the game of basketball, yet he's a freaking genius in the broadcast booth. So there's a few things here. Number one, certainly Tom Crean caught some flack for his struggles at times as a coach, but no one would say that Tom Crean was not a good basketball coach. Tom Crean is a good, potentially very good basketball coach. Is he one of the elite coaches in the country? I don't think that we think that. I don't think that we think he was the best fit long-term at Indiana, but the guy won 2 Big Ten titles. The guy developed players very well. He knows the game and is a good coach. What's interesting, I think, is that, you listen to him talk about basketball, and intellectually, he knows and understands the game, I think, as well as anybody you'll hear talk about it, and with good reason. He's a sponge, a voracious reader, a voracious learner, a hard worker. We know all of that. But the question for a coach, but the question for a coach is not what you know and maybe what can you articulate to an audience, but what can you get your players to do on the court? And that is a huge difference. And sometimes that doesn't translate. And so, I'll have to defer to you guys on how he's doing as an analyst, because I haven't watched any of the games that he's done. But, hearing him on podcast, seeing him do NBA draft stuff, I'm not at all surprised that people are lauding him for that. But I just think that's the difference there. And I think when you watched his teams play, you watched players improve individually and players really improve their skills, but you sometimes wondered about players' understanding of the bigger picture concepts of basketball and their ability to kind of function as a team, especially when you didn't have that one player like a Yogi Ferrell who could orchestrate it and take over when it needed to happen. So to me, that was the struggle that Tom Crean faced. And that has nothing to do with his intellectual understanding of the game, but more his ability to lead a group of guys through a full season and through some tough times, and his ability to transfer his knowledge into something that his players can turn into action on the court.
Yeah, first of all, I would say to you, Jared, if you haven't listened to him do a game, you should go out of your way to do it, because it is really interesting. Considering the guy was a coach here for so long, it's interesting seeing him in another world. And quite frankly, I'm happy for Coach Crean that he has found, something he's very good at it. And it sort of reminds me of the Tony Romo in football thing, where he calls out what's going to happen because he just knows basketball. And look, you're right. Knowing basketball isn't enough. A lot of these coaches could be this good. And I think, and Tom was always a guy who was a basketball nerd, where he watched basketball constantly, even when it wasn't his teams. He watched basketball, he studied players, and you could tell that from his, when he did the draft stuff and would analyze these players getting picked. And so I think that anybody who didn't expect him to be a good analyst was clearly not paying attention. He's a great fit for that. I think he'll be coaching again soon. I think he's likable. I think that people will get, attached to him, and I hope he finds the right spot for him. But at the same time, you're right. The difference between knowing basketball and being able to translate into getting players to do what you want is there's a vast gulf there. And you look at Thad Matta's last few years, since we've been talking about Ohio State, you look at his last few years at Ohio State, he could not get the team to do what he wanted to do. Sometimes the voice gets stale. Sometimes as a coach, you run out of tricks in your bag to get guys to focus.
And sometimes you might recruit bad fits, like what happened to Mata.
And that is exactly what happened to Mata. And also, I think that he got burnt out. If you saw him in his last few years, he looked so worn down by it. And there are rumors of some physical stuff going on there as well too. But so, it has a lot of it. Being a great coach isn't just about your basketball acumen. It's also about your assistants. It's about, your development staff. It's about all of that stuff coinciding. And it's about the players you pick to play for you. Do you make the right decisions? So there's so much that goes into being a good coach. And that's why there's so few of them, because there's so few guys that knock it out of the park consistently. And, there's some guys who come in and have runs where they're great. And there's some guys who are just there all the time. And that's because a lot goes into being a great coach, an elite next level coach. And as a program like Indiana, yes, of course, Jared. But as a program like Indiana, you've constantly got to be looking for that next guy, and not a guy who's just good enough. You've got to be looking for that next guy. And clearly they think Archie Miller was that next guy.
And Dane Fife might have been that next guy too, to be fair.
We'll get into that one someday.
Just poking the bear at this point.
Yes.
Yep. Been a fun night, fellas. I'm gonna check out.
Jared just softly whispering Dean Spanos into the mic just to try to see if Ryan will snap.
Good. Andy, any final thoughts on this one?
No words.
No, I think Crean's been good. I think his passion comes through, and I think that always came through even when he was at IU. And I think what you guys said, the knowledge of the game and the ability to scout and all that is part of the equation of what makes a successful basketball coach. And there are a number of guys who can do the motivational stuff and not be good X's and O's guys and have the same kind of struggles that Crean may have had and all that. So I think it's
and
just
at the same time,
but
at the same time, there are guys who are great at X's and O's, but can't reach kids and can't get players and can't get kids to do what they want. I mean, there are guys who can do each of those things and not together. And you'll see them have fits of success, but long-term sustained success are the guys who can do it all.
Yep.
Yeah. But I don't think anybody, to your point, Jared, would insinuate that Tom Crean doesn't know basketball. I mean, I think that would be silly for anybody to say. That wasn't why he wasn't successful as everybody wanted him to be at IU, and that wasn't ultimately the reason that he got fired.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, in our final segment, we look ahead to this game on Saturday against Michigan State. What kind of chances Indiana has here to pull off the upset? Talk about that and a little bit more in our final segment. Stick with us. All right. Good segment there, fellas. That was 11:51, so we're going to have like 30 seconds for the final segment.
Sounds good.
30 seconds.
Huh? No. We're at 45:0. We're at 45:08.
Well, do Andy's preview and then. So, how far down was Michigan State against Penn State? I mean, was it a lot?
They were down at least 10 at one point.
I saw when they took the lead, so that was like I
started watching right when they started to come back, but they were.
Because one of the announcers said, this is a great comeback or something like that. Yeah.
They're
all right. So here's a question for you guys because
they won by 8. I mean, they just murdered Penn State.
By the way, so we did have someone in Slack who asked us to address the Michigan State stuff, not the game, but the broader stuff. And to me, I don't really think this is the right venue, and I don't know it well enough to put forth any opinions publicly, really.
Maybe
Ryan, you might be the one.
Maybe in the offseason. That's an offseason.
Yeah, so as long as you agree, I didn't really want to get into it on this show.
When we're reaching for topics, we can discuss that.
11 is the most they were up. They were up 41-30 with about 15 minutes left in the game.
Okay.
And they got outscored by 19 points the rest of the way. And this is why Pat Chambers might not be coaching Penn State very much longer. Although it was just a matter of like, well, how many shots are Tony Carr and Lamar Stevens going to jack up over the course of the game?
Yeah.
And the answer was a whole lot because between the two of them, they shot 43 times.
Holy moly.
And made 16.
Wow. All right. So we did have one other question. We can hit it really quickly. What do you think Archie's biggest emphasis this offseason will be?
Shooting.
And what's interesting about that is, we'll address it here. We'll go quickly, and then Andy, you can fill up the rest of the time talking about Michigan State. I think we should.
I might actually just talk about Michigan State more from like an NCAA tournament perspective because their schedule down the stretch is kind of wonky. I mean, I don't know that we need to.
Well, but okay, is there any reason outside of the game being at home? Is there any reason to think that, Indiana, I mean, obviously having Juwan Morgan for 40 minutes at home would make an impact, but is there anything that we've seen in recent games? Like they don't look distracted from all the scandal stuff, which is one reason you might think that, Indiana would have a chance.
And
I mean, they came out and played. They've gotten down. Maybe big is too strong a word. I mean, they've gotten down double digits in their last 2 games, and they let Wisconsin get back in it toward the. I mean, they pulled away at the end, but Wisconsin kind of hung close to them. Illinois was kind of close to them for a while because they turned the ball over so much. So
yeah, this is different than we were facing them last time, where they had coming off a loss and had a week to prepare. So,
yeah. So so that's the stuff that we can hit up.
Yeah, I would say something about that.
Okay. All right. Cool. So we have 4 minutes and 18 seconds. I'll keep you updated.
Okay.
All right. Here we go. You guys ready?
Yeah, so I see you can let Ryan answer the first one. I don't need to answer the biggest emphasis in the offseason.
Yeah, it's gonna be quick.
Okay,
that's what she said.
Well played.
Yeah,
well played. Okay, here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, wrapping up another week of talking Indiana basketball. One final question here real quick that we'll address before we talk a little Indiana, Michigan State. What do you think Archie's biggest emphasis this offseason will be? And we've already hit that some in this show. I mean, I think, Ryan, we understand shooting is going to be a big emphasis, but I do think it's important to remember that because this question was actually prefaced with, the defense has improved, the turnovers have improved. I think it's important to remember that those things are still going to be emphasized, and defense especially. We know that Indiana isn't anywhere close to being where they need to be from a pack line perspective. And there are, they're kind of doing some of the standard stuff, but there's more advanced principles to put in as they get better. So even though, yes, Indiana needs to get better from a shooting perspective, there's going to be plenty of defensive work and defensive focus as well. Maybe it's not 75-25 like what Archie talked about, it was kind of this offseason leading into it. But it's important to remember, you don't want it to just be whack-a-mole where you think like, okay, we've got the defense down. Now let's focus all on shooting, but then the defensive problems pop up. So there will be a balance no matter what the emphasis is.
Yeah, I think it's got to be shooting, though. I think if that's the one thing you've got to single out. I mean, they have to shoot the ball better. They got to make free throws. They got to be able to hit threes. And we see their 2-point shooting percentage at times has been outstanding. Okay, now let's work on the other stuff. But I mean, you still have to influence the other stuff. You still have to emphasize. I'm sorry, not influence. Emphasize the other stuff, and make sure it's being focused on as well. And you're right. The defense is always going to be a big thing with Archie.
Yep. All right, Andy, we got a couple minutes left here. Let's turn our attention to Indiana, Michigan State this weekend. The Spartans obviously obliterated Indiana the last time we played them. They were, coming off some poor performances, had a long layoff. We expected them to come out sharp. They did, and jumped on Indiana early. What are some reasons, besides the game being at home, that Indiana might look to say, hey, we've got some legitimate hope for this result to be much more competitive than that last one was up in East Lansing?
I think if you look at the last few games that they've had, they've fallen behind, by double digits in the last 2 games to Maryland on the road, and then Penn State at home on Wednesday. Now they did come back and win both those games by 6 and 8 points. Even Wisconsin at the Breslin Center, Wisconsin was within 6, I think, about halfway through the second half, and Wisconsin has been playing really poorly lately. So I think they've shown a propensity to kind of let teams hang around. And their turnover issues are still, almost last in the Big Ten in turnover percentage. Offensively, they don't force a lot of turnovers. So again, when you think about, things that have been issues for IU this year, turn the ball over has been one. They don't really do that a great deal. And maybe that's a way that IU can get some easy baskets, because it's not easy to score against them by any means. They also have the lowest, oh no, I thought it was the lowest defensive free throw rate. So I thought that would keep IU off the line, which would have been good, but they're only 4th there. So
okay, but they are 244th in the country in free throw defense. So they're not defending free throw shots well. So maybe that will help Indiana shoot well from the line.
Yeah, obviously.
I always love that stat.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. But an important game for them from an NCAA tournament perspective, though, I will say. I mean, their seed is kind of weird. I think people would expect them to be projected a little bit higher, but they've got 7 games left. They play 5 of them on the road, but they only play one team, which is Purdue, in the top 80 of KenPom the rest of the way. Most of them are in the 90s of the teams they have. So not a lot of chances to improve their resume, a lot more chances to potentially hurt it, which, at this point, I use in a position to play spoiler more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think Indiana has played Michigan State pretty well at home in recent years. Obviously, last year that was not a Michigan State team as good as this year's team is, but Indiana won that game, and we've been pretty successful against them at home. And so if Indiana can come out with the same kind of effort and intensity and focus that they had in that Purdue game, they can certainly make this a more competitive game, hopefully a 40-minute game, and we'll take our chances. Hopefully we make some shots, and we'll see what happens. All right, that'll do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording, or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, go to assemblycall.com/join to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. All right. There we go.
All righty.
Good show, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
I'm signing out of this.
Hope everybody enjoys the game Saturday night and then can get some rest and be ready for the Super Bowl on Sunday.
Hey, did JD respond to your credential request?
Yes. He said yes.
I'm going to apply to him now.
So, Andy, the 2 tickets I have, you and Jen can use those.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I don't get approved for a credential, which I'm sure I will, but just in case, if I have one of my friends might be in town and she's not going to go to the game, so I may go sit at Nick's and watch it with her if I don't get approved, but I'm sure I will. Just saying.
Yeah, I would think that you would.
I can't imagine anyone would deny you the opportunity to cover the game.
Seriously.
I mean, you're going to be speaking before the game, so
yeah.
Gotta.
Right.
And Andy, I'm going to follow up soon on setting up that interview with Robert Johnson. So hopefully that happens. I'm sure it'll be short if it does, but if it does,
5 minutes is enough for a good interview.
Yeah, 5 to 8 minutes, something like that. You're still all set up on Skype to be able to do a recording, right?
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, cool.
You're not going to tune in, Jared, and oversee it to make sure he doesn't do anything inappropriate?
No. The president of the fan club, he can handle that. Andy knows what he's doing. He's hosted podcasts.
No, I just meant that, he didn't do anything that would embarrass the brand of the assembly call. Like, can I get your autograph?
That wouldn't embarrass the brand. Everybody knows that we're fans first.
Yeah,
I know. I'm kidding. All right, guys.
The stupidity of asking for an autograph over the phone might not be good. The act of
Well, you could
just
have a
asking
mail
for
it
the
to you.
autograph
That would be hilarious. You should do it.
If I send you a self-addressed stamped envelope, would you be able to?
It's a picture of you, and I Photoshop myself in. I've got your head on my body.
Oh man.
Yeah, best stuff always comes when we shut the recording off.
Yeah, it does. Well, I mean, we're still.
Oh well, no, I mean the radio recording.
But yes, the radio. Yes.
All right, I got to get back to work, guys. Have a good night, everybody.
All right.
All right.
See you, Ryan. Yeah, I think that's yeah. And then I'm gonna talk with Galen about getting us set up to record Saturday. Okay. We've been emailing back and forth, so we'll have something set up for that. So
okay.
Things are coming together for the trip.
All right, very good. All right, well I'll have to listen into how the show goes on Saturday. I won't be there Saturday, but I'll be on Monday.
Right. Yeah, you won't be there. It may end up just being me and Ryan. I'm not sure that any of our usual suspects to fill in are able late on a Saturday night. So it may just be the two of us. Okay. And Ryan will probably be distracted with the Super Bowl stuff, especially if, someone gets arrested for solicitation or something the night before. So I may just be just be doing the whole thing myself.
Plus Dane Fife will be on the Michigan State bench the whole time, so he'll just be getting quietly angry.
That's how I'm going to do that. What did you think of the work that Dane Fife did working the official on that one bad call, Ryan? I thought he was really on point there. What did you think of the adjustment that he suggested to Coach Izzo? That was some brilliant stuff that really would have worked well at Simon Scott Assembly Hall, no?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely for anybody that's still on, try to make sure you tweet at Ryan during the game some questions about Dane Fife. That'll be good. Good times. All right.
All right.
We'll have a good evening. Get some rest.
See you, man. See you, everybody.
All right,
I'll talk to you Saturday night.